Showdown to Faith for the Apocalypse. My name is Nick, and this channel is a space for us to come together to talk about faith, politics, and whatever else we want. We are in the midst of our Lenten series called Gospel Against Empire, where we are seeking to understand the anti-empire nature of the oldest gospel, the Gospel of Mark. Throughout the series of Lent, we have been completing daily Bible readings that have been helping us as we work our way through kind of reading every word of the text. In our readings last week, Jesus kind of shifted his attention away from larger conversations that kind of describe the way of the cross and the kingdom of God towards teaching moments, dialogues, and conversations with his disciples, where Jesus explores the kind of personal and interpersonal dimensions of the way of the cross. Jesus teaches that following him and following God requires us to incorporate these principles of justice and nonviolence not only into our kind of public and political lives, but also into our personal lives and in our most intimate moments, driving things like how we choose to spend our money and how we treat our partners and our children. This week, we continue our reading with Mark chapters 11 and 12 as the gospel author once again has a kind of shift in tone. I want to give you a heads up. We are actually kind of going to veer off of the liturgical calendar. Palm Sunday isn't coming up until this coming Sunday. We still have a little bit of a ways to go. Palm Sunday is the kind of liturgical holiday in our church calendar when we celebrate Jesus's arrival into Jerusalem, leading up to his arrest, death, and crucifixion. We usually celebrate Palm Sunday by waving around palms in the air, and after Palm Sunday is over, we save those palms so that we may burn them and use them for ashes for next year's Ash Wednesday. Now, that's all stuff that we have to look forward to on Sunday if you are someone who attends church. But here on this channel, we are going to go ahead and jump to Palm Sunday and talk about Palm Sunday today, because Palm Sunday happens already here at the beginning of chapter 11. In an effort to kind of stick with the calendar, we could push this reading back a week and kind of take more time with earlier scripture, but I think that would do us a disservice because there's a lot of really great content that happens after Jesus arrives in Jerusalem and before we get to the actions of the kind of political drama that we will see later on in Holy Week. So this week we are going to go ahead, jump off calendar, talk about Palm Sunday, and I apologize to those who are specific around when we kind of celebrate our liturgical holidays. So let's dig into the text for this week. Now, in Mark 11, we find ourselves at the beginning of a kind of secondary direct action campaign in Jesus's ministry. If you can throw your mind back to the very beginning of Lent, the very beginning of our series, the Gospel of Mark started with a declaration of Jesus's power and authority before going on to describe a direct action campaign where Jesus traveled around Galilee, spreading his message, teaching, and healing, all the while kind of breaking social, religious, and economic rules and expectations while spreading a message of love, justice, and solidarity. This time around, with his second direct action campaign, Jesus has shifted his focus and his audience a little bit. You see, in that first direct action campaign, Jesus's primary concern was the community, his audience members. The entirety of the campaign occurred on the margins, kind of starting out in the wilderness and ultimately culminating in these kind of house-based preachings and miracles in the city of Capernaum. Jesus has now left the margins and has chose to travel to Jerusalem, the very seat of the systems of power that Jesus has been kind of teaching and preaching against. Jesus is now entering the arena in order to engage with these systems of power. Jesus is choosing direct political confrontation with these systems of authority, directly criticizing and calling out these systems of oppression that they depend upon. Jesus is getting really bold in his political activism and activity here. Now, our readings this week include a lot of sassy Jesus, which is really one of my kind of favorite Jesuses for us to reflect on. This week, we have the reading where Jesus throws the moneylenders out of the temple and kind of critiques the religious authorities, the Pharisees and scribes, right to their face, right in the middle of this kind of religious celebration and high holy days. And all of that is stuff that we will explore if you are signed up for our daily Devo emails. But this week, I want to focus a little bit more, like we talked about our Palm Sunday, as we kind of begin to consider the political theater and messaging that is wrapped up in this occasion of joy and celebration. Before we talk about the political theater of Palm Sunday, we need to know what political theater is. Now, when I'm talking about political theater, I could be talking about one of two things. I could be talking about a theatrical or artistic or some other kind of performance which has some kind of political commentary or critique that makes a statement to or about systems of power or some socio-political issue. I could also be referring to the large scale kind of public dramatic actions carried out by governments or other systems of a power in order to exert authority and maintain control. If I'm wanting to know more about what that second kind of political theater looks like, I can kind of close my eyes and imagine Russian or North Korean military campaign, or the kind of theatrics of terror that we saw in the United States around the Red Scare and during the kind of McCarthyism era. This is also the kind of political theater, this kind of theater of terror of state power that awaits Jesus at the end of his trip, his arrival here in the city of Jerusalem. You see, Jesus knows what's coming. He's already had two very detailed kind of prophecies of his death where he has said, "We will go, I will be arrested, I will be killed." Jesus knows the fate that the empire has for those that it perceives as a threat. He knows what the punishment is that awaits him for kind of spreading the gospel and the good news of this alternative worldview, power structure, and values system that he is inviting his followers to participate in. With this big, scary, clear end in mind, I find it all the more hopeful that Jesus begins his time in Jerusalem. He arrives in Jerusalem with an intentional, rebellious act of political street theater. In the context of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has been established as an alternative Messiah. He is a different leader than what we would have expected. We would expect the Messiah, the liberator of the people, to arrive in a grand kind of military procession. And in the city of Jerusalem, that means that we are expecting Jesus to arrive from the Western Gate. After all, that's the gate that already has a large scale procession occurring at the beginning of Passover celebration. The season of Passover during Jesus' lifetime was the largest religious holiday of the year. And Passover was an occasion where people from all over would leave their homes. They would travel, entering Jerusalem in order to celebrate the high holy days in the city where the temple is, in order to be at the center of religious life during these kind of very important days. And because of that, the city of Jerusalem would swell in population, going from approximately 50,000 people that lived there on a daily basis to 200,000 people who were there for the holiday. Now, if you've been in a college town or live somewhere around a sports stadium, you know what it's like to have an event kind of dramatically increase the population in your city. It can lead to some kind of security concerns as we have more people, and many of them who may not be from this area. The Roman authorities are even kind of more nervous about the celebration of Passover in Jerusalem because Passover is a holiday that celebrates deliverance and liberation from forces of oppression. The Jewish people come together to celebrate the freeing of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt and call for a hope for future and further liberation. This means that Jerusalem, a city experiencing a political and military occupation, would have seen a dramatic increase in that occupying force to go along with that holiday. And this visiting occupying force, these visiting police people that we could imagine, wouldn't just show up in the city. They would arrive with a grand entrance and military procession that would kind of make a show of their power in order to convince those watching that they should behave while they're in the city for this celebration. Now, Jesus, the Messiah who is bringing peace and speaking of justice and solidarity, doesn't come in through the West Gate with this huge procession with war horses and chariots, but rather enters the city from the Mount of Olives, which is on the east side. This alternative Messiah who's offering the opposite of what we expect chooses an alternative entrance, entering opposite from where we expect. And not being very quiet about it, may I add. We can kind of imagine Jerusalem, all of these people are coming in, are kind of shuffling with all of their belongings, their sacrifices they want to take to the temple. Jesus could have easily kind of slipped into the crowd and find his way into the city without making any noise. In fact, he probably did. We're about to talk about how he borrowed a donkey, and the individuals giving that donkey just heard his name and said, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I already talked to Jesus." But that's not the entrance that we read about. Rather, it's this kind of intentional entrance that causes this ruckus that presumably, or at least kind of symbolically, pulls attention away from that military display of power that's happening over at the gates where the Romans are entering. And all throughout Jesus's kind of performance of this procession, Jesus turns expectations on their head. Instead of this military procession with war horses, Jesus enters on a borrowed donkey, a symbol of peace and a giving up of his own power. This donkey, this symbol of peace, also would remind a contemporary audience or those watching Jesus in Jerusalem of scriptures in Zechariah and Daniel and these prophecies that are calling for the transformation of the world towards peace. The exact opposite of the war horse procession that we see coming from that western gate. As Jesus prepares to enter Jerusalem, his disciples and his followers begin throwing down their coats on the back of the donkey and on the ground in the street. They pull palms from the trees using all of the resources that are available in order to honor Jesus. In response to this humble entrance and procession, Jesus is met with honor, not at the expense of the city or the community like those armed forces, but rather through the self-expression and self-sacrifice of the community around him. For one glorious moment, his followers put aside the political, economic, and social priorities of their day in order to celebrate God and give freely from their heart without concern for self. This anti-empire parade includes a variety of chants that celebrate Jesus's divine lineage and call towards redemption. It affirms his divine and ultimate authority. The former secrecy that we saw from Jesus, the don't tell anyone what happened here, has completely melted away as his identity is in full view and is met with joy and celebration. Many of us engaged recently in some direct action or political street theater as we participated in the hands-off protests. We interrupted business as usual to send those in power a clear message about our values and our dedication to justice. And I have to tell you, it was awe-inspiring. So many of us know that things have gone wrong and more people are waking up to their ability to do something about it. Large scale actions like this bring hope and joy. They let others around us know they aren't alone and invite others to step out of their comfort zones and to participate in resistance. They are beautiful and amazing, but they can't be the end of the story. Remember, right after the high of the celebration and action of Palm Sunday, Jesus falls into the hands of the state, of the empire that will punish him. The crowds of Palm Sunday abandon Jesus and resist efforts that could be taken to save his life. The story doesn't end with Jesus's arrival in Jerusalem. Rather, the story ends with the resurrection of our Christ. It is through diligence and through personal commitment and through small actions and everyday decisions that we are invited to be a part of a revolution of love, a revolution of hope, and a revolution of justice. This revolution is only possible when we open our hearts and our lives and we learn to oppose forces of oppression, not only in big, loud, public ways, but in small, soft, quiet ways that invite transformation, not only into our external systems, but into our internal and interpersonal lives. It is in finding ways to resist the forces of injustice and oppression at every single moment that we participate in the way of the cross, that we are able to find liberation and hope, whether or not the resistance wins. The action is not the end. The action is the beginning. A moment of joy and celebration that pulls together the community and gives us hope and nourishment for the journey as we continue to push for redemption, hope, liberation, not just for ourselves, but for all in the community with us. Thank you for joining us this week. I encourage you to find a way this week to kind of continue your commitment to resistance. This is something that we've been developing and working on throughout the Lenten season as we are headed into Holy Week next week. I think this is a great time to reflect on what actions we've taken over Lent and how they've changed us or fed us or helped us and how we can carry those things forward. We will be back again next week as we kind of pick up the political drama of Holy Week and talk about the political dimensions of Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday. If you like this content, if you're interested in the stuff that I'm putting out, you can support the channel by hitting like or subscribe or sharing the channel with others. You can also check out the link below to find my website and a link for donations. Thank you so much for being here with me. I will pray for you, and I hope to see you next week.